Thank you, everybody, for coming. I'm excited to talk about managers with you today. My name is Ryan. I am a data science and machine learning manager at Proofpoint, which is a cybersecurity company. Grew up in Minneapolis, and
Are you hiring?
I'll get to that at the very end of the talk, yes. But don't abuse your privilege of the hot mic. Sorry, I called you out. All right. So anyway, I'm very excited to be here. The intent is that this is more of a discussion. It'll be somewhat guided. Who here is a manager? Show of hands. Awesome. Okay. And who is interested in becoming a manager? Okay, great. Anybody, an individual contributor who wants to stay an individual contributor? Awesome. I hope that this talk will be useful for you too. So there should be something in here for everyone. So the goal is that this is useful for both ICs, that's individual contributor for those of you who haven't heard the term before, and managers alike. The idea is that it gives you a broader perspective on management, some lessons and frameworks that we can apply to how we think about management on our own career trajectories. And I'll be happy if we come away from this with a sense of community. That's what Minibar is all about, and I love it. So thank you all for being here. The disclaimer is I am not an expert. You are the stars of this show. Again, this will be sort of facilitated discussion. I'm going to bring up a book. The book author is not infallible, and I am not infallible in terms of converting the extensive work that she's put into this book into teeny tiny slides. So think of them as straw men for sake of argument. Your mileage may vary. There's different people here from different companies with different lived experiences. So that's what this is about, just sharing. The plan is I will introduce the book. We'll alternate over the course of 5 different anecdotes between anecdotes and discussion. It'll start very specific and then open up broad, and everyone can participate. So what's the book? Let's get started. The book is Becoming a Manager by Linda Hill. She's a professor at Harvard Business School. I'm going to share with you, so show of hands, who's read this book? Anybody? Awesome, awesome. Okay, I highly recommend it. My favorite quote is this: a good manager is always providing fresh new ideas, such as how to take advantage of conference call technology. Woo, yeah. Who wants to guess? When was the original research for this done? Just shout it out. Shout it out. Years. 1990, 95. 80s. 87. Okay, ding, ding, ding. So field work from 85 to 88, but the lessons are timeless. And I actually stand by this. This is the only dated statement in the book. The book has great frameworks for thinking about how we manage and what it means to lead a team. So what it actually does is follows 19 first-year managers on their transition from individual contributor. They performed well, they got promoted during their first year of management. So branch managers in a securities firm and sales managers in a computer company. She documents the complexities of the transition and tries to distill sort of the essential qualities of management. Okay. So with that, I don't want to talk too much. Let's jump into the first anecdote and spark some discussion. So the first anecdote is the myths versus the realities of management. Now, another question for the audience before I share the next slide. Those of you who are managers, put your hands up again, please. If you have been managing for less than 2 years, lower your hand. 2 months for me. If you've been managing for less than 5 years, lower your hand. Less than 15 years. Okay, great. So we have a wide variety of experience here, and I would expect some of the stuff we talk about will change based on how long you've been in management and what you've seen in your career. So this is the first anecdote, myth versus reality of management. I'm not going to read through it all. There's a lot of text on the slide, but it'll be up for a long time while we discuss. I'm going to call out 3 things: the myth on the left and the reality on the right. The first one is the source of power. The myth is that power comes from formal authority. In reality, It comes from everything but formal authority. That's a direct quote that she uses in the book from one of the study participants. The second thing I want to call out is that the key challenges, oftentimes we think when we're stepping in to lead a team that the challenge is the complexity of the process that you're leading the team through and the technical things. When in reality, it's also important to build teams that are able to cope with change. That's one of the hardest things that organizations go through, and it's happening all the time. So if you can build resilient teams, you're doing well. The final thing to call out is essential competencies. This gets back to what we talked about before, technical complexity, technical competencies. Obviously, you're an IC, you get promoted, you're probably a good technical leader. But human and conceptual competencies become more and more important as you move into management. So the question for you, and let's get hands up if you want to answer these. What do people leaders do? When did one of these realities of myth versus reality sink in for you as a manager? And what do people leaders do? Like what is the job? Yeah, up here. Let's run a mic up here. We got to get it on the mic for the recording. Thank you for volunteering. All right, awesome.
The big thing for me is when I first started being a manager, you went through this, oh, I'm the leader, but I found out, no, you're not really the leader. But if you can get everyone involved in it and they own we're like, this is our project. It's not my project, it's our project. You get them bought in. And where I felt, when I was a leader, I was the tiebreaker. So everyone had a voice. And when we got to difficult decisions, I would go, okay, I have to make a call. I'm going to make a call here. But people were more bought in that way. And they felt like it was their project, not my project. Yeah. Or the company's project either. It's like, this is ours.
Yeah, personal involvement, being able to it's all sales, always be closing, right? Setting that vision, incredibly important. Who else? Thank you. Up here, yes. Thank you for volunteering.
Is it okay if I relay a story?
I would love that.
Okay. This was when I was working for the CEO here at Best Buy years ago. Mm-hmm. And a colleague came up and said, I need to see the CEO. Okay, who doesn't? Why do you need to see him? Well, because I need to become a VP. Okay, let's go talk about that. And I said, why do you need to be a VP? Because I need to have authority. And I said, a title will give you some authority, sign off on documents. But I said, really what you need is influence. So that myth versus reality is very true.
Yeah, awesome. And that's a really good point that you bring out. We're going to talk about sources of power later in the talk. That's one of the anecdotes. So we'll dig deeper into that point. Thank you. Anybody else? Who else? Down here in the front. And I see the CrowdStrike shirt. The CrowdStrike hoodie, that's another cybersecurity company. It's good to see other folks in the industry.
One of the things that took me a long time to realize, and I've been in management going on a quarter century, is that my responsibility, particularly the further up the org chart you go, is less about tie breaking or exercising authority, as is noted here, and much more about building the team that can do those things without you being there. And in fact, it's interesting to have this talk after the talk about burnout, because failing to do that, if you're good at your job, is a recipe for burnout, because you built a machine with you at the center and it doesn't work if you're not there.
Yep, perfect. And I know one of the things that goes into burnout as well is if you feel like you're doing meaningless work, and a lot of the panelists in the last session alluded to this, it's very easy to burn out if you feel like your work doesn't matter. And so part of the manager's job is to set that vision and also steer the team in a direction where the work is impactful. Other thoughts?
Yes.
Woman up here in the sweater. Thank you for volunteering, and thank you for your response, by the way.
I feel like the role of the manager is to manage the work and to coach performance.
Good. Thank you. Yes. And we'll talk about team leadership in one of the other anecdotes. Yes, you have one.
In managing a team that was all 100% volunteers, it was, how can I serve you? How can I make your lives better? And I found that my team, I had a guy that was great in IT. I work in IT. He was better in IT than I was. I wanted to do the IT. He said, Michael, let me do it. Go do something else. Is there anything I can do for you? And I became a servant instead of them serving me. I found serving them made the team want to stay there and be there. That's just my 10 cents in the process. There's a little book by John Maxwell, 360-Degree Leader. That's all I'm going to say.
Yep, that's excellent. So the idea of a manager as a servant, and we'll get into that in one of the sources of power. We've got another question down here, I think. One of the things that you touched on is this notion of attractiveness. We'll get to this in another anecdote. Attractiveness is not physical attractiveness. It's putting yourself out there, being vulnerable, making your team members' concerns your own. All right, yes, thank you for volunteering.
Okay. So for me, the myth column, it more says about the conventional stereotype of a manager. Mm-hmm. On the right, it's more about the leader. And there's a kind of boundary line somewhere between a mid-level manager and director. When you are a manager, I think we need to drive the execution. When you are a leader, you seek to inspire and have that kind of influence across the organization. The other thing is to add someone said previously is managers overall, I think they should redefine the work. I.e., we're giving a blurry problem to solve, but let's translate that into either a vision or more actionable work, but it's no longer the original work. It's a redefined set of work that can achieve a common goal.
Mm-hmm. Yep. I think you touch on two really important points there. Thank you. The first one, or one of them, is sort of, execution versus vision. And the second one is being able to steer a team in a direction that, is impactful, that drives both execution and vision. So really good points. I think we have time for one more. Anybody? All right. I'll give you more food for thought then. So let's move to the second anecdote. I mentioned this earlier, sources of power. The one that we think of in terms of managing or execution is formal authority, but there's actually quite a few. So there's two categories of sources of power that Linda Hill talks about in this book. The first one is personal power at the top. And the second one is positional power. Okay. So let's go through personal power first. A couple of categories. You've got expertise, relevant knowledge and skills, your track record, and this, keep in mind, this applies to both managers and individual contributors. We all have the ability to influence our own expertise, our own track record, our own effort, expenditure of time and energy. And then this is what I was talking about before, attractiveness. Attractiveness is not physical attractiveness, and the importance of individual examples here, so charisma, openness, honesty, loyalty, and empathy, some of those transcend company boundaries, whereas company culture in other instances can dictate which ones are valued more highly in that organization among people leaders. Okay. So those are sources of personal power. Sources of positional power, formal authority. This one's pretty obvious. This is the position in the hierarchy and the responsibilities that you or your team have been prescribed. Relevance. This is a little more soft. How important is your task to the organization? Centrality. I would argue that everyone has the ability to drive their position in key networks, becoming more visible, which is another one. Autonomy. How much discretion do you have in a position? If you have a lot of autonomy with how the work gets done, you have more power. And then finally, visibility, the degree to which your performance or your team's performance can be seen by others. So that's it for the anecdote. Framework to think about power. And the question that I want to pose to all of you is, what does a manager have control over, both for yourself and for the team that you lead? Or if you're an individual contributor, do you have, especially if you're high up in the ranks of individual contributor, like staff or principal level, do you have sources of positional power as well, even though you don't have formal authority? So think on it for a second, and then we're going to run mics. Let's open it up to discussion. Yes, Nike hat. Thank you.
I think one of the most important things, especially at a bigger company, bigger-ish, it's great to have the organizational structure, but the flatter you can make that informal leadership track, the better, right? So associate engineer, staff engineer, doesn't matter. Those ideas are really what matters, and that ultimately drives the autonomy across the organization. So that's what I've seen a lot of.
Mm-hmm. Great. Thank you. Yeah, good. Yes. Sweatshirt. Thanks.
I guess I've seen in my experience with like kind of the role of the manager, especially with like software team, or it could be any team, right? For me, it's two things. One, influencing culture, right? So what does the team expect from themselves, right? Are there more experienced engineers who are coasting? Are they driven? Are they setting good examples for newer engineers? Newer engineers like sort of learning, like, again, what does the culture mean? Is there continuous learning, right? And I feel like sometimes it takes the manager to sort of prod in that way, maybe, especially if a team's if it's been long running, maybe it's gone a little stale. I think you can sort of inject some excitement, a little fire in there. And then I think from the second side would be asking lots and lots and lots of questions. So I almost see it in my ways, like I think of it as like the Socratic method all the time, right? Which is, am I challenging the team in effort to improve what they're doing and improve the way they're seeing things? Am I constantly sort of challenging and asking tough questions about why we're doing things the way we're doing things, if things can be better, and getting feedback and sort of letting everyone take ownership and drive their own sort of accountability to that.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it kind of helps with the balance of like trying not to like micromanage every decision, but empowering individuals to work within a framework that you as a manager can kind of set up for the team for success.
Yeah, and I think a lot of what you're touching on is also it's both this and it's also this idea of managerial style. And we'll come back to that in the fourth anecdote actually, and talk about the dimensions that managerial style is located within. Yes, orange shirt, hit it.
So if the question is, what does the manager have control over? I feel really comfortable about my personal sources of personal power, and I feel comfortable kind of using that power for my team and myself. I have more difficulty. It is more of a challenge for me to acknowledge, go after, or leverage the positional power stuff.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point. Which ones are easier to take advantage of? Definitely on the top, because you're used to those from being an individual contributor, and they rely less on network building among your peers and your superiors. Red shirt, yes. And then we'll come up to mask.
So when I think about my own job, there's a whole category that's missing here, which is relationship power.
I love it. Yeah, tell us more.
I find that as I move from an engineer to a manager to a director, my own set of personal expertise became less and less relevant. I'm a cloud guy by background. Someone shows me some front-end code, I'm like lost. And positional power, you're talking about having some struggles with leveraging that. It's really your weakest source of power across levers you can pull. The bulk of my day job is either strengthening or using relationship power, where I'm talking with peers, I'm talking with subordinates, not as their boss, but as someone who wants to provide context or share rationale exploration for why we're tackling a particular problem or choosing to ignore a particular problem. And so I see that as something that's missing here, where the relationship power and leveraging relationships within the business is how I get the bulk of my work done.
Right. Yeah. I think network building has a huge amount of impact on relevance, centrality, autonomy, and visibility. So it's almost like it ties everything together. Great contribution. Yes, in the mask up here.
Okay, I've been a manager for like 5 years, and I found that the context really dictates which kind of power I use. Like with my team, I never ever use, I don't think I've ever been in a situation where I've had to use my formal authority. But in dealing with like other teams, if they're trying to push something through, and because my company is particularly hierarchical, I can be like, no, I'm actually the director of this area and we're not doing that. But like it really, just the different contexts and the different sources of power being better in some contexts versus others is really important.
Yeah, that's a really good insight. One of the themes she touches on in the book is the difference between compliance and cooperation, and how sometimes it's not like compliance is the only thing you use, and it's not like cooperation is the only tool that you use, but there's situations in which each is sort of the right tool for the job. So I'm going to move us to the second anecdote, or the third anecdote. I've got, timestamps here for when I want to move, just to keep us pacing through. Third anecdote is how you actually exercise informal influence. This is one of the questions that I put up in the blurb for this talk. She offers, or this book offers, a fairly academic take, and I'll share it with you now, and then I will ask you to poke holes in it or share your own experiences. So, how do we exercise informal influence if we can't exercise formal authority as managers? The first thing in her framework is you identify people that you depend on, and perhaps, ideally, this dependence is mutual. So you look for whose cooperation or compliance I need, and who needs mine. And then you also look at who could derail me achieving my team's goal. With that, then you identify differences between you and those people. So different goals, different values, different stakes, pressures, different working styles. And think about what's underlying those differences. This could be different information that they have access to, or different incentives. And then finally, you go back to your sources of power and you think, what source of power can I use to influence this relationship? And then you have to put in the time and energy to either build that relationship up or repair a relationship that's been broken. So again, this is very academic. It's very procedural. My guess is, for those of you who are managers, you don't have, this checklist that you go through every time you encounter an interpersonal difficulty, right? But you do probably have mental frameworks that you use and have developed over the years to think about what it means to handle interpersonal conflict, or think about building relationships outside of your own team with other people in the organization. So let's turn it back to the audience. Raise your hand if you'd like to speak. This is pretty academic. Is it true? How do you exercise informal influence? And how do you either drive a team or an organization or a company forward? And are you successful? Does it work? What hasn't worked? Yes.
So I was in video games for 21 years, and we were shipping a product, and we were doing 100-hour weeks. And so I had to get everyone on board to get going. And so I picked out leaders within the group that were on my team, or I had to influence to get them to get their people to come into work, because where I worked, it was very siloed. So even though I was the head of the project, they didn't report to me, so they could do anything they want. So I had to get them on board. So one of the things I did was having to work all these hours. I set up a daycare on Saturday so people would come in, bring their kids in, their kids were taken care of, then their partners at home could have the weekend and weren't like forced to have that. Also, if somebody was I could see if somebody was having an issue, I talked to them. I found out people had cancer, people had breaking up, people divorces. My dev lead, who we did have difficulties with, he came in one time and he was I could just tell he wasn't doing well. And I go, what's wrong? He goes, I had a fight with my girlfriend. And I said, come with me. So I brought him to his manager and I said, tell Tony he can't work this weekend. And the manager just looks at me and goes, Tony, you can't work this weekend. And didn't ask why or anything. And I said, tell him he'll be fired if he works this weekend. He goes, Tony, you're going to be fired if you work this weekend. So I was looking out for people, but also we set norms, what was acceptable, what was not acceptable, fighting, not fighting. And so we built this team, and the code name for the team was called Cujo. And when we'd get together in presentations, the team would bark. And so it formed this team or whatever. And I thought I did an okay job. I had a party at my house when we shipped, and one of the wives reamed me a new one in front of everybody about her husband being gone so long. And one of the developers stood up and said, you have it wrong. Chip didn't make us come to work. Chip created a place where we wanted to come to work every day and work late. And so that was my reward right there. It was great. And so
That's
you
awesome.
can move it forward, but you have to care.
Yep, fantastic. That was a great story. Thank you.
Oh!
Yeah, bark. Yeah, setting team culture, setting expectations, being there for people, servant leader, being empathetic with your employees. What else? Someone from this side, maybe. Someone who hasn't spoken. Let's get the middle here.
A lot of my leadership experience doesn't come from tech necessarily, but the more I moved up, the farther I was away from the daily conversations and knowing what the morale. It was really easy to find someone on the team that knew the temperature of the room, knew what was affecting morale, and I could have conversations with them to know who I needed to advocate for.
Yep, awesome, good. So still keeping sort of your finger on the pulse of the team, even as you ascend the hierarchy of leadership, very important. Was that a raised hand? Nope. Anybody else? Yes, far back. Flamingo shirt. That's the best call out I'm going to get to make today. Flamingo shirt. Thank you for that opportunity.
My pleasure, thanks. Just joined, but this is a really interesting topic to me. So first off, I think that any influence that I've had, informal influence by caring about people and finding the ways that our goals can align, that's all of the wins that I am willing to qualify as wins. But then the other part of it is, as I am informally influencing people to move in a direction, be open to them changing my direction. They are influencing me as well. So it needs to be a cycle rather than a one-way influence. So I just thought that was a good thing to call out.
That's super prescient. So two-way street here. We talked about, yes, absolutely. We talked about our ability to dictate sort of our team's direction, but turning that into a two-way street and allowing the team to influence our direction and bubble ideas up. Super important. My timer is going off. We're going to move to anecdote 4 here. And this gets to management style that someone called out earlier. Paradoxes of team leadership. There's 4 dimensions here. I'm going to read them out because they're important. And the way I want you to think of this is sort of, where do you fall on each of these spectrums? One side is not better than the other. Both sides are valuable. And oftentimes leadership style, or what we like to think of as a leader's style, is defined by where they fall along these 4 dimensions. So the first one, embracing individual differences versus collective identity and goals. Fostering support versus confrontation. They both have a place to play. You don't want everybody to be yes people, right? Focusing on performance versus taking the time to focus on learning and development. And then finally, relying on managerial authority, which you do have to do sometimes, versus relying on team members' discretion, agenda setting, and authority or autonomy. So these are the 4 dimensions. My question then for the team, or not the team, I'm in too many meetings. My question for the team, my question for the audience, for all of you wonderful people is, what makes an effective people leader based on your experience and why? So whether you're a manager or an IC, what makes an effective people leader? And I know we've touched on some of this. If there's ICs in the room, we'd love to hear from you too. Empathy was said. Good. Yeah, probably no need for a mic unless you want to, do you want to unpack that, empathy? Okay. No unpacking. Who else? Hands up. Yes, we'll take.
Creating an environment of trust through transparency.
Good. Yes, trust through transparency. So where would that fall on this? Would this be, let's see here. Transparency. So that would be more on the fostering support, right? Can anybody think of an example where confrontation is actually important to have? It can be bad, but you can also foster healthy confrontation. Yes, Mohawk. Love the do.
Yeah, with confrontation, I think there are times where team members need to stick up for each other. And if one team member or someone is behaving in a way that is just not healthy for the team, it's got to be important to call it out. And as a leader, sometimes you really need to be the one to do that. Otherwise, you're implicitly blessing it.
Yeah, that's a really good point. In the book, a lot of what Lyndon Hill talks about with the experience of these, managers on their first year in the job is some of the mistakes that they make are, doing something that is enabling of bad behavior or setting a precedent that, goes awry with the team. Yes, right behind. Go ahead. Tattoo arm.
Yeah. I think without confrontation, there really cannot be innovation. There can't be true solutioning, right? Like a good manager, a good team leader needs to be able to stand in this paradox. I think that's the mark of the good manager, is that there's an acceptance and an acknowledgement to the team that we need to stand in a storm. We need to stand somewhere and embrace all of this. But especially with confrontation, if there isn't a difference of ideas being shared, then why are we meeting? What are we talking about, right? We need the difference. We need those diverse perspectives in confrontation.
Yep, awesome point. I want to follow up on that because it's a thread that I myself struggle with. So this is a little bit self-serving, but it's also non-intuitive. There's a difference between technical confrontation and interpersonal confrontation and managing that. How do you build a team that fosters for itself that technical confrontation? That seems like, at least in my mind, that's the thing I haven't figured out how to do yet. Thoughts, and then we'll get back to previously scheduled programming. Someone who hasn't talked yet. Yes, mask, plaid shirt.
I think, at least again, this is only anecdote, not data, but in my experience, fostering the idea of consistent experimentation with clear goals and measurement is the thing that allows those confrontations to become generative. If it's just, this is more performance on a factor of whatever versus, yeah, but I can read this one. Like, we probably have some values that may have an opinion about which of those we go with, but ultimately, what's the experiment to see which of these will work? Because the end result is rarely, or the meaningful piece is rarely, what was the exact outcome of one confrontation? The meaningful thing is creating, everybody abuses the term psychological safety, but how do you make it so that a team actually understands how to do that well and how to figure out what worked and what didn't, as opposed to who was right and who was wrong?
Yes, absolutely. Separating the technical conflict from that interpersonal conflict and also fostering, constant experimentation. Good. Yes, let's take one more here. Black shirt standing up.
I was going to say a big thing of that could be that it's fostering safety in being wrong. Yeah. Being able to make a mistake and it's like, yeah, we tried something, it didn't work. That's fine. No big deal. And being able to admit yourself that like, oh, I was wrong, I made a mistake. That tells other people like, oh, it's okay to do that kind of thing.
Yep.
That makes it very easy for everybody else to throw out any idea they have, because if it's wrong, it's okay.
Yep, I love it. And that gets back to personal power. You're exercising your personal power of quote unquote attractiveness to set that standard of honesty and openness for the team. It is 11:51. We have 9 more minutes in this talk, so I'm going to bump forward. I actually lied. There is no more anecdote. It's just discussion on career growth. And I wanted to leave time for this because we have a lot of people in different stages in their careers in this room. So I want to hear from you. And this is as much for me, again, self-serving as it is for everyone in the room. But mostly it's for you guys, I promise. How can we prepare to move up in the ranks from IC to management, from line manager to director, et cetera? Are there new challenges as you move up in the ranks? How did your mindset change for those of us in the room who are more senior leaders? Near the top, do you start to see similarities between individuals and managers? So like a principal engineer and a VP, you know, how similar are they? What qualities do they share? What's your advice? We'll open it up, that's all. Yes, down here, and then we'll go up there.
I think the biggest thing I had to learn going from an IC to a manager is you have to ask yourself the question, are you okay with stepping away from coding and being technical every day? Because you will learn very quickly. You can't do both. You will want to, but you can't. You have to make that decision. And also too, if the organization has a growth pattern that's just like, hey, you're a senior engineer and you naturally go into management, that's terrifying. Like there should always be tracks for technical people and people who want to be people leaders.
Yeah, that was something that she documents pretty extensively and we'll get the mic running up to the lady coming down. Yeah, this emotional transition where you start to realize like, oh my goodness, what have I done? I've like left all of my technical expertise to, you know, wither and die. All right, that's probably very cynical. Go ahead, yes.
I'm kind of going to echo that a little bit, that if you're given the opportunity or you want the opportunity to really evaluate what you want to do, which also includes how you want to grow and what you're good at, because kind of like you said, like not everybody who wants to be a manager is going to be a good one, and not everybody who is forced to be a manager is going to like it. And so making that, it's a really introspective work, and then it can change over time too. Like I've never actually wanted to be a manager, but once I get there, I'm like, okay, I actually do like this. I like watching my team succeed. Like I like helping them. But that's like, it's an ongoing internal conversation with what do I want from this?
Yep, awesome. Quick show of hands to follow up on that point. Who here has been both who here has gone from management to being an individual contributor again at any time in their career? It's pretty common, and it's more common than you would think. And so, you know, yeah, exactly. The line sort of gets a little blurry, and it's a process of self-discovery. Someone from this side of the room. Yes, red backpack, hand up.
Yeah, so there's something that I've heard called the Peter principle, where you get promoted. People get promoted to their point of incompetence. Like when you can't perform the job anymore, then you don't get promoted anymore. So in my experience going from IC to management, you have to completely change your mindset, get a complete new set of skills every time. And if you want to keep on progressing, you have to realize what you know now isn't enough. It isn't what you need to know for the next level. So keep learning.
Yeah, yep. And a lot of times to ease the transition, you know, we look to experiences that we've had with good managers and bad managers as well. But yeah, Peter principle, good. Thank you for sharing. Who else? Let's get in the middle here, yes. I know I'm making left runner do a lot of work. Thank you, left runner. Thumbs up, awesome.
I'm watching for hands on this side.
Yeah, yep.
So I probably, like many tech people, work in a company that uses Agile. So we've separated the project management from the people management. And I'm curious if there are managers here who work in that environment, and what do you see the role of a people manager in that environment doing when you're not actually leading the work itself?
Yeah, I love that question. Is that a hand to follow on? Yeah, go ahead and pass the mic back, and then we'll go over here to Flamingo.
Yeah, I've been in that situation. What I've found is your role becomes an enabler. So someone else has a vision and you're helping them succeed, you're holding them up. And so there was a reference to kind of the more servant leadership style. And so if that clicks in your head, that's how I've found to make that work. That, you know, they don't have to be a part of your formal responsibility, but your job is to make them successful. At least that's how I've rationalized it.
Yeah, great, thank you. Okay, over here behind the pillar for some of you.
That makes me think of what kind of had me going across the line into management and back to individual contributor is whether you are managing resources or growing people. And the potential that I keep striving for is where you have people who figure out how to do things. You don't need to manage them. You just need to help them grow in any way that you can help the people grow. And that, I believe, is the best business practice, which often gets set aside when businesses are under stress, times are a little tight, money's a little tight, and you go back to managing resources, which is actually the opposite of what will bring the business success. So that's a really interesting struggle to me.
Yeah, that's really hard. If we go back to this slide, you're saying it's almost like focus on performance becomes more important. That third dimension moves to the left under stress. So how do you keep a focus on learning and development, which is so important for creating teams that respond well to change, right? That's the long-term success of an organization. Anybody have a final point to make? Yes, let's close with over here.
Sorry to manipulate, but the person was talking about Agile. It's your job to, you know, not the project work done, but to get them where they want to go. My first manager at Apple told me my job is to get you where you want to go in life, if that's here at Apple or if that's here anywhere else. And that completely changed my whole focus on what a manager does. Yeah. And so, yes, there's managers that make sure you get your things done each day, but then you also need someone, where do you want to go in your career? What do you want to do? Make sure that's being taken care of.
Yep. One of the pieces of feedback from one of these first-year managers after the first year in the book was, you know, it shifted from an initial mindset of 50% of my time is fully technical, like player coaching, essentially. At the end of that first year of management, they completely changed. They said 70% of my time is people development. All right, so this has been great. Thank you, everybody. I have a couple of final notes. Again, I'm Ryan. I'll be around today. I'll hang out here for about 10 minutes. Let's see, Proofpoint. Proofpoint's great. Proofpoint is hiring. Check us out. You can Google us. And now go get lunch with a final round of applause for our mic runners. Thank you, guys.